What's up, guys? This is Chris from DraftDashboard.com.
Here are my DFS picks for MLB Sunday, August 22nd.
These picks apply for DraftKings and FanDuel. Before I get started, please drop a like on this video and hit that red subscribe button
And hit that bell icon.
so you don't miss our new videos.
In this video, I'm going to go over my top DFS picks for today's MLB slate.
And if you stick around to the very end of this video, we'll use the Draft Dashboard tools to make a DFS lineup using the picks we just made.
Okay guys, we have a 9-game slate today, so let's take a look at the pitcher position. I'm going to save some salary here at the pitcher position. I like Steven Brault with a 25% pitching advantage over the St. Louis Cardinals. Steven Brault is only giving up a .488 OPS versus righties, and he's facing 7 righties here today. On top of that, the Cardinals have only hit 16 of his last 86 pitches. That's a 186 batting average and a huge sample size. Steven Brault is only $7,200 FanDuel salary and $300 more on DraftKings. Projected at 22.3 fantasy points here tonight. He has an ERA of 1.84. His record is 0-1 on the season, pitching an average of 76 pitches per game, averaging 24 fantasy points per game. He scored 29, 27, and 15 fantasy points in the last 3 games. So I like Steven Brault here versus the St. Louis Cardinals. Okay, let's take a look at the catcher first base position. I like Vladimir Guerrero Jr. batting against a low salary pitcher, Drew Hutchinson. Vladimir Guerrero Jr. is batting a .897 OPS versus righties, and Drew Hutchinson, he's giving up a 1.127 OPS versus righties. There's no at-bats versus Hutchinson yet, and Vladimir Guerrero Jr. is $4,400 FanDuel salary. He's $1,800 more on DraftKings, projected at 10.3 fantasy points here tonight, averaging 14 fantasy points per game on the season. He scored 3, 19, and 0 fantasy points in the last 3 games. And Vegas thinks there's going to be 10.5 runs scored in this game. That's their over-under. So I like Vladimir Guerrero Jr. here versus Drew Hutchinson. Now, Joey Votto is also in a good spot here tonight. He's been killing it. But I also like Jonathan Shoop with a 26% batting advantage over Steven Matz. Jonathan Shoop, he's batting 14% better versus lefty pitchers, batting a .865 OPS versus lefties. And Steven Matz, he pitches his worst ball versus righty batters, 13% worse than his other pitches, giving up a .949 OPS versus righties. Now Jonathan Shoop is 1 for 2 with a 5 OPS versus Matz because that one hit is for a home run. He's $3,400 FanDuel salary, $1,300 more on DraftKings, projected at 10.4 fantasy points here tonight, averaging 10 fantasy points per game on the season. He scored 0, 10, and 22 fantasy points in his last 3 games. And Vegas thinks there's going to be 10.5 runs scored in this game. That's their over-under. So I like Jonathan Shoop here versus Steven Matz. Now, Ryan Mountcastle is also in a good spot here, but if you want to save a little bit of salary, take a look at Colin Moran with a 34% batting advantage over Adam Wainwright. Colin Moran is batting 22% better versus righty pitchers, batting a .824 OPS versus righties, and Adam Wainwright, he pitches 12% worse to lefties as he does righties, giving up a .690 OPS versus lefties. Now, I like this pick because Colin Moran is 9 for 23 That's a .391 batting average and a .965 OPS versus Wainwright. And that's a big sample size. And he's only $2,700 FanDuel salary and 1,000 more on DraftKings. Projected at 10.5 fantasy points here tonight. Now he's only averaging 7 fantasy points per game on the season. He scored 0, 6, and 6 fantasy points in the last 3 games. So I like Colin Moran here versus Adam Wainwright. Okay, let's take a look at the second base position. I like Colton Wong with a 30% batting advantage over a low salary pitcher, Sean Nolan. Colton Wong, he bats a little bit better versus lefty pitchers, batting a .745 OPS versus lefties. And Sean Nolan, he pitches his worst ball versus lefty batters, 27% worse than his other pitches, giving up a .375 OPS versus lefties. Now there's no at-bats versus Nolan yet, and Colton Wong is $3,300 FanDuel salary, 1,200 more on DraftKings, projected at 10.4 fantasy points here tonight, averaging 10 fantasy points per game on the season. He scored 22, 0, and 13 fantasy points in the last 3 games. So I like Colton Wong here versus Sean Nolan.
Real quick guys, I got great news. For a limited time, we're offering a full 30-day trial to Draft Dashboard. You can try all of our DFS tools for all sports. You can try the Position Optimizer, where you can see the top players ranked for each position. And we added a new Player Trends tool, where you can see the top salary differences between FanDuel and DraftKings. It's a really good tool to help you pick out value for the site that you're playing on. Oh, and if you're tired of doing research every day, we just added a cheat sheet that shows hand-picked plays for the slate. No confusing stat lines, no headaches, just a simple cheat sheet that shows the absolute best players for your lineups.
I also like Tommy Edmund with an 82% batting advantage over Steven Brault. Tommy Edmund is batting 25% better versus lefty pitchers, batting a .852 OPS versus lefties, and Steven Brault, he pitches his worst ball by far to switch hitters, 58% worse than his other pitches, giving up a .264 OPS versus switch hitters. Now Tommy Edmund, I like this pick because he's 5 for 12 with a .417 batting average and a 1.129 OPS versus Brault. He's 3,000 FanDuel salary and only 500 more on DraftKings. Projected at 10 fantasy points here tonight, averaging 9 fantasy points per game on the season. He's been on fire, scoring 15, 9, and 19 fantasy points in the last 3 games. So I like Tommy Edmund here versus Steven Brault. Okay, let's take a look at the third base position. I like Patrick Wisdom with a 4% batting advantage over a low salary pitcher, Carlos Hernandez. Patrick Wisdom is batting a .861 OPS versus righties, and Carlos Hernandez is giving up a .816 OPS versus righties. There's no at-bats versus Hernandez yet, but Patrick Wisdom is $3,200 FanDuel salary, 1,400 more on DraftKings, projected at 12.6 fantasy points here tonight, averaging 9 fantasy points per game on the season. He scored 22 and 19 fantasy points in the last 2 games. So I like Patrick Wisdom here versus Carlos Hernandez. Okay, who do we have at the shortstop position? So, you know I always like Xander Bogaerts, but I'm going to save a little bit of salary here at the shortstop position. I like Joey Wendell with a 7% batting advantage over Ronaldo Lopez. Joey Wendell is batting 22% better versus righty pitchers, batting a .798 OPS versus righties, and Ronaldo Lopez is giving up a .674 OPS versus lefties. Joey Wendell is 2 for 3 with a 2 OPS versus Lopez. He's only $2,600 FanDuel salary. He's $1,700 more on DraftKings. Projected at 9.3 fantasy points here tonight, averaging 9 fantasy points per game on the season. He scored 13, 0, and 0 fantasy points in the last 3 games. So I like Joey Wendell here versus Ronaldo Lopez. And the other guy that's not looking too bad here if you want to save some salary is Nikki Lopez with a 47% batting advantage over a low salary pitcher, Alec Mills. Nikki Lopez bats 17% better versus righty pitchers, batting a .654 OPS versus righties. And Alec Mills, he throws 30% worse to lefties as he does righties, giving up a .869 OPS versus lefties. There's no at-bats versus Mills yet, but Nikki Lopez is only $2,700 FanDuel salary, and he's only $200 more on DraftKings. Projected at 7.8 fantasy points here tonight, averaging 8 fantasy points per game on the season. He scored 28, 0, and 22 fantasy points in the last 3 games. So I like Nikki Lopez here versus Alec Mills. Okay, moving on to the outfield position. I like Juan Soto with a 38% batting advantage over Adrian Hauser. Juan Soto is batting a 1.092 OPS versus righties, and Adrian Hauser, he pitches his worst ball to lefty batters, 33% worse than his other pitches, giving up a .923 OPS versus lefties. Now, Juan Soto is 0 for 3 versus Hauser, but the splits are great. He's $4,400 FanDuel salary, $1,500 more on DraftKings, projected at 13.1 fantasy points here tonight, averaging 13 fantasy points per game on the season, and he's been on fire, scoring 19, 12, and 38 fantasy points in the last 3 games. So I like Juan Soto here versus Adrian Hauser. Now I also like Yordan Alvarez with a 50% batting advantage over Tyler Anderson. Yordan Alvarez, he bats 49% better versus lefty pitchers, batting a 1.130 OPS versus lefties, and Tyler Anderson is giving up a .699 OPS versus lefties. There's no at-bats versus Anderson yet, and Yordan Alvarez is $3,900 FanDuel salary, $1,600 more on DraftKings, projected at 11.1 fantasy points here tonight, averaging 12 fantasy points per game on the season. He scored 32, 38, and 9 fantasy points in the last 3 games. So I like Yordan Alvarez here versus Tyler Anderson. Now I also like Christian Yelich with a 44% batting advantage over that low salary pitcher, Sean Nolan. Christian Yelich is batting 16% better versus lefty pitchers, batting a .866 OPS versus lefties, and Sean Nolan, he pitches his worst ball versus lefty batters, 27% worse than his other pitches, giving up a 1.375 OPS versus lefties. Christian Yelich is $3,500 FanDuel salary, $2,100 more on DraftKings, projected at 12.4 fantasy points here tonight, averaging 10 fantasy points per game on the season. He scored 64, 0, and 3 fantasy points in his last 3 games. So I like Christian Yelich here versus Sean Nolan. Now, Rafael Ortega's in a good spot, so is Austin Meadows and Cedric Mullins. But if you want to save a little bit of salary here at the outfield position, take a look at Andrew Benintendi with a 35% batting advantage over that low salary pitcher, Alec Mills. Andrew Benintendi, he bats 5% better versus righty pitchers, batting a .587 OPS versus righties. And Alec Mills, he throws 30% worse to lefties as he does righties, giving up a .869 OPS versus lefties. Now there's no at-bats versus Mills yet, and Andrew Benintendi is $2,900 FanDuel salary, and he's 400 less on DraftKings. So I like that DraftKings price. Projected at 9.7 fantasy points here tonight, averaging 9 fantasy points per game on the season. He scored 12, 25, and 3 fantasy points in the last 3 games. So I like Andrew Benintendi here versus Alec Mills. Okay, now I've got a value play for you. Take a look at Corey Dickerson with a 72% batting advantage over this low salary pitcher, Drew Hutchinson. Corey Dickerson is batting 9% better versus righty pitchers, batting a .734 OPS versus righties. And Drew Hutchinson, he pitches his worst ball versus lefty batters, 62% worse than his other pitches, giving up a 3 OPS versus lefties. There's no at-bats versus Hutchinson yet, and Corey Dickerson is $2,600 FanDuel salary, $500 more on DraftKings, projected at 9.4 fantasy points here tonight, averaging 7 fantasy points per game on the season. He scored 0, 22, and 10 fantasy points in the last 3 games. And Vegas thinks there's going to be 10.5 runs scored in this game. That's their over-under. So I like Corey Dickerson here versus Drew Hutchinson.
If you want to try all these daily fantasy tools for yourself, click the link in the description below this video or just go to draftdashboard.com. You can use our DFS lineup optimizer to build quality lineups using our picks and your own custom player pool. Click the link in the description below this video and try all these daily fantasy tools right now. Thanks so much for watching. Oh, and don't forget to subscribe to this channel and hit that bell icon so you can get instant updates whenever we post a new video. Thank you so much for watching, everyone. If you enjoyed this video, please smiggity smash that like button and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Oh, and please comment below with your favorite player for this NBA slate. I love to hear what you guys have to think. Thanks again, and good luck.